It's really wonderful to be with you tonight. Really, really lovely to be back with friends in Sheffield. And I'm noticing also people I've never met yet in Sheffield. And even though I've been coming for so many years, so that's great because it means new people are getting involved. And that's lovely to hear. Lovely to hear about the people wanting to become mitras. Good to see Bodhivasini, new Dharmacharini, new order member arriving. I don't think there are any other new order members I've seen, but just very, very happy to see you all. You were going to do baked potatoes tonight, weren't you, for baked potato cup? But he didn't, unfortunately. But we didn't. He didn't do baked potatoes because Pragna Hridaya is our cook now. So it's very lovely to see you all, but very poignant as well. I always find these Zoom things with old friends a mixture of really real sort of happiness at seeing you, but also there's that pain, isn't there, of not actually being with you. I find this Zoom thing quite confusing in some ways from that point of view. Wonderful, fabulous, magical technology, and yet there's the ache of actually not being with you. But there we are, and been asked by Bodhinaga to speak on practicing the Dharma in lockdown, and it's I'm really glad to be speaking on this subject. It's such an important subject, of course, but it's not easy for me to talk to you because you're all in very different circumstances. Some of you will be living with your families, with children. Some of you will be living alone. Some of you will be living in shared houses. Some of you will be living in communities. Some of you are working. Some of you are not able to work. Some of you are working in very demanding professions and situations in the NHS, in social work, in education, and so on. Others, like I say, not able to work. Some of you perhaps have health conditions. Some of you, or perhaps all of you, will be very concerned about loved ones who you can't see. And there is this sort of general anxiety that can be around about the future. So it's not easy for me to, in a way, talk to you all because you're all in such individual situations. I'm sure as well, I don't want to in any way be patronizing because I'm sure you've already discovered so many things that work for you in your life and practice during this period. You've found all that out. For myself and Pragna Hridaya here, we're in really good conditions. There are 14 of us living in a large house with a big garden in very open countryside. We have a huge shrine room filled with Buddhas. We have the stupa with the relics of the great Bodhisattva Dada Rinpoche. We live in a sacred space. We live in a shrine, actually, and we're very harmonious. Really getting on very well together, and we're very well set up technologically to communicate the Dharma. But of course, there does remain uncertainty and even a degree of unease, if not anxiety, about the future and about the state of the world, even though there's been some great, causes for hope lately. But how do we practice? Let me try to engage with this topic. How do we practice during this time? So I'm going to give you 5 things to practice. I'm sure you'll be discussing these. Hopefully I'll get through this quickly enough so you can go into groups. I've been told I've got to get through this quickly. So the first thing I want to mention is acceptance. Acceptance with a capital A. I think the first thing we need to do, if we are actually going to practice, we need to accept the situation. Full acceptance of the situation. This is happening. There is a pandemic. There is a very strong recommendation from the government to go into lockdown, well, more than a recommendation. We need to accept that. By acceptance, I don't mean passivity. I'm talking about something very dynamic. I'm talking about the patient acceptance of reality, of the way things are. If we don't accept, it's very easy to fall into resentment and blame. Blame the government, blame the world, blame life, blame anybody, and complain. And then there's endless mental proliferation, endless looking on websites about this, that, and the other, and very easy to fall into anger and ill will. Shantideva, the great 8th century Bodhisattva, in his discussion of the perfection of patience, right at the beginning of his discussion of that, says that what nourishes anger and hatred, what the food of anger and hatred is misery, dalmanasa, unhappiness with what is happening to you, not getting what you want, not doing what you want. If you keep feeding on that misery and unhappiness, you'll just get resentful, and you'll just spiral down lower and lower. Misery begets resentment, resentment begets more misery, and before you know it, you're in a very, very deep hole. We need to break that. We need to just break it if we're falling into it by full acceptance. By talking about acceptance, I mean something entirely creative. It's definitely not passivity. It is the patient acceptance that the artist has in relation to their materials, to the paint, to the canvas, to the paper. You work with all that patiently. You engage with that patiently to create the painting. You even engage with the limitations. You might not have all the material you can have, but you still want to make, you still want to create. So you engage with that patiently, creatively. Or if you're not an arty type, then the builder with their materials. The builder has to be patient, patiently accept the state of the house, the complexities of the project, the limitations imposed. You work with it all creatively, with ingenuity, and with capability. So I think this is the attitude we need to cultivate in relation to what is happening, this creative acceptance of the conditions that we're in, really working with them in a way that actually doesn't, let us fall into misery and resentment. Really working with ourselves, with our relations, with our loved ones, our families, our friends, our colleagues, our brothers and sisters in the Sangha. This is all our material, us and others. We're all in this together. So we need to look again at what's happening. It's so easy to be jaded, and to lose a sort of sense of freshness. We need to look with fresh eyes at what is happening. What can we do? Even see in this time the possibility and potential for an entirely new way of being. I had an email from a friend of mine who works in our centre in Berlin, and he's saying it's an interesting time for some of the newer members of the Sangha getting involved, because they don't want to go, they're on sort of the equivalent of furlough, and they don't want to go back to their old jobs. They've tasted something entirely different, and they want to break out in a new direction. We can even think of that great Tibetan notion, which is based on earlier notions of bardo. Bardo means between two. Ba-do. Do means two. Ba means in between. The in-between state, the intermediate state, antarabhava in Sanskrit. This is usually associated with death and the state between death and rebirth. But bardo is any situation where your usual way of being is disrupted, where the ground of your being is taken away. And that's what's happening during this time. We can't see loved ones. There's even a sense that the future has been cancelled. So we're kind of suspended. There's no time in bardo. This weird period since March. I can barely remember what I did yesterday. We come around to talking about our week. I can't remember what I've done in a week. It's really bizarre. There's this timeless zone, and I've done loads. It's really strange. So we're sort of suspended in some ways, and that throws you, and all sorts of strange material can come into play, all sorts of unresolved things within our consciousness, but also you can feel liberated from your habitual ways of being, your habitual modes. So there's a chance for an entirely new way of being, a more open, boundless way of being, a more creative way of being, alive and fresh and vivid. So acceptance, that's the first thing. Full acceptance, creative acceptance, a patient acceptance in relation to the materials. Secondly, the second thing to practice is joy. I'm following Shantideva again here. He asks himself the question, okay, if misery is the food that anger and resentment and hatred feeds on, is the condition for anger and ill will and resentment, therefore I must cultivate joy. I must cultivate uninterrupted joyfulness. Nothing must interrupt my mudita, he says, my sympathetic joy. So it's a joyfulness especially at the happiness, the well-being, and the qualities and achievements of others. But don't exclude yourself. He's not talking, Shantideva, here about any sort of superficial happy clappy state, pretending that everything's okay, and putting on that grin, being in denial about the real challenges that are happening. It is a joy that's in relationship to all the difficulties and the suffering around you, even within you. But it's really an attitude of developing an attitude of looking for the good, capital G, the beautiful, capital B, the true, capital T, within this situation. Mudita arises out of metta. And I think it might be quite good if you experimented with turning your daily metta bhavana into mudita bhavana, where you, having developed a little bit of metta, you look for the good in others and you take delight in that. You take joy in that. Maybe try it out for a week, looking for the good, the joy, the happiness, the qualities in others, turning towards that, making an effort to do that. And maybe even make a note every day of the qualities you've seen, the qualities that you've developed in yourself, the qualities you've seen in others. Just make a note, just list them off last thing at night. At first, it might seem simply a practice of noticing, but in time, the real emotion of joy will arise. The real emotion of joy at goodness will arise. Well, express that. Give full expression to that. Tell people how good they are, not in that sentimental and shallow way. Oh, you're a lovely person, da da da. No, see the quality, really see it, really love it, really delight in it, and rejoice in that to the person. In a sense, celebrate the person, but tell people how good they are. It's so easy to be cynical. It's very easy to criticize. It's so easy to complain. That's the easiest thing to do. It's the coward's way of life. It's the coward's way of life. The really heroic person is the one who looks for quality, for the sources of joy in the darkness. When I was reflecting on this, I had to stick on some Sufi music, an Afghani Sufi Qawwali group called Ahmad Sham Qawwali, and I discovered them by chance listening to a Radio 3 program some years ago, and they were interviewing Ahmad Sham himself, and they were, of course, when Kabul was taken by the Taliban, they were jailed because the Taliban are very anti-music and anti even devotional music. And they were very, very badly treated. They were beaten in the jail. And Ahmad Sham was asked how he felt about that, what that was like. And he said, well, in our Sufi tradition, we say, when the roof is off the house, when everything is taken away, then Allah, the beloved, really shines through, like the sun shines through. When everything is taken, then you have the real encounter. The more they beat us, the louder we sang. The more they beat us, the louder we sang. Great, wonderful, wonderful communication of real joy, real love, because that's what's going on here. It's the joy of love, seeing everything as blessing, even the most demanding circumstances, even loss, even pain. William Blake says, love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So this practice of mudita is this, building a heaven in hell's despair for yourself and others. That's what mudita is. It's building a heaven in hell's despair. Don't give in to the hell of despair. Don't shrink back. Express your joy. Look for mudita. So this leads me to the third thing to practice: abundance and celebration. Abundance and celebration. I'm very glad there's going to be Bollywood dancing, in your Sangha Day celebrations. And during the first, when we went into lockdown, when that happened, I was asked to decorate our shrine, and I knew that we needed. I just knew that we needed on the shrine lots of gold cloth, lots of very brightly coloured cloths. Years ago, I bought some devotional cloths from that are offered in Sikh temples. Lovely, bright red, blue, yellow, green, and with lots of golden tassels. And I knew that these all had to be on the shrine. Even we wanted to wrap up a Padmasambhava image in this cloth. And I knew that we needed to have lavish puja. So we every Friday evening we had a lavish puja where we read all the offerings from Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, where there's this just tremendous abundance of offerings. I just felt very strongly that we needed abundance and richness, because the tendency at a time like this is to shrink. It's the opposite of the sort of resentment and lashing out. The tendency is to shrink back, to curl up, or to just get dull. And we really need to push back against that. So every day, practice abundance. Arrange flowers on your shrine. Make offerings. Have flowers and candles on your dinner tables. It's a wonderful thing. Make it an occasion. Your evening meal, even if you're alone, a nice posy on the table. Dance, sing, even if you're alone. Give expression to the abundance of life in you and the world around you. It's interesting, isn't it, that one of the great feast times of our calendar is Christmas, which goes back to old pagan festivals. Feasting is really important in the depths of winter. It's really important psychologically, spiritually even. It's interesting as well that Milarepa, the great yogi Milarepa, living alone in solitude in a cave up in the mountains, used to sing and dance. He's just ecstatic and abundant, even though nobody's around, giving full expression to his love of the Dharma, his love of life, the love of the Dharma flowing through him. It's easy to think at this time that we shouldn't be abundant, that we shouldn't celebrate because there's so much suffering. We should be dour and miserable. But in times of darkness, it's all the more reason to celebrate abundantly. Doesn't mean that you're insensitive to others, not at all. Milarepa sings this wonderful song in solitude. It's from the songs to do with the song of the yogi's joy. And you can see the coming together of the bliss, but also a sense of compassion for the world around him. So he sings, "Here at Yolmo Tagpo Senjitson, the tigress howling with a pitiful trembling cry reminds me that her helpless cubs are innocently playing. I cannot help but feel a great compassion for them. I cannot help but practice more diligently. I cannot help but augment thus the bodhicitta. The touching cry of the monkey, so impressive and so moving, cannot help but raise in me deep pity. The little monkey's chattering is amusing and pitiful. As I hear it, I cannot but think of it with compassion. The voice of the cuckoo is so moving, and so tuneful is the lark's sweet singing, that when I hear them, I cannot help but listen. When I listen to them, I cannot help but shed my tears. The varied cries and cawing of the crow are a good and helpful friend unto the yogi. Even without a single friend, to remain here is a pleasure. With joy flowing from my heart, I sing this happy song. May the dark shadow of all men's sorrows be dispelled by my joyful singing. So, celebration and abundance. And this brings us to the fourth practice, which I've called solitude and nature. It's so important to have time alone during this time. I mean, some of you are on your own all the time, I know, but some of you aren't, I know. I think it's especially important for those of you in families, perhaps especially for mothers with young children, dads as well. Let's not exclude the dads. It's so important to have time just with yourself, even if it's just for 10 minutes, if that's all you can get, just to sit and gaze and allow your mind and your mind and your heart to expand of itself. Not just when you're meditating, which of course is very important, daily practice, but just relaxing, doing nothing, sinking into the scene around you, whether you're in your room, you're in your space, or if you can, go alone into nature, go out into the natural world, get away from the screens, the Zooms, and into a world of trees and rocks and sky and water, your garden, a park in the city, one of those wonderful cemeteries in Sheffield, if you can. Go and listen to the birds, go and just be with the trees, listen to the wind in the trees. Try and do that if you can every day. Just have that kind of contact with the natural world. I mean, here we're so very, very fortunate at Padmavajra. I was walking yesterday, went off into our local nature reserve, which was really flooded, walking among the trees, which have still got lovely yellow leaves. And I've been in so many meetings on Zoom, it's easy to forget the natural world, and just walking along, just feeling the life around me, even though it's autumn, even though we're moving into winter. I mean, it's so full of life. I mean, it was high tide and the river had flooded, and the whole of the sort of land was flooded in the nature reserve. This marsh that we have is quite extraordinary, with the swans and the birds, and just this gorgeous scene, and having a feeling for the surging of life around me. And of course, when you feel the surging of life around you, you feel the surging of life within yourself. It is so that sense of what the Buddha calls becoming. It's interesting, isn't it, that the Buddha's images for the path are so often natural images. The lotus growing up out of the muddy swamp, the Dharma likened to a rain cloud, and all of us living beings like the whole of life bursting into blossom because of the rain. So it's very important to have this experience, I think, within nature, to experience ourselves as part of nature, and that nature is in us. Sometimes we tell ourselves when we're so busy, I don't have time to be with myself or to be by myself, or I don't have time to go and sit by that tree or to sit in my garden. I've got so many things to do. But that's a false economy. Actually, I notice when I spend time like this, just in the garden or up in the nature reserve, however briefly, it creates a space, and I return refreshed to what I do, and I do it better. Sometimes we need to take a great break from thinking, trying to nut things out, nutting things out. We can just lock and lock and lock. We need to take a break from that. We need to go and refresh ourselves in the space of, if you like, beingfulness. So this brings me to the fifth and final thing of practicing in lockdown. Do things well. Do things well. When Bhante Sangharajta lived in Kalimpong, he made a friendship with a Lama named Toma Geshe Rinpoche. He wasn't one of his teachers. He was quite a young Lama. He was the incarnation of Lama Govinda's teacher, if you've heard of him, the great German Lama. So Toma Geshe Rinpoche was a very great Lama. And this young Rinpoche had been arrested by the Chinese before he escaped from Tibet. He was treated, tortured, beaten, and sentenced to hard labor in a Chinese labor camp, where of course they were forbidden to practice. All their symbols were taken away, their malas, their images, their robes, any reminder of their religious culture, and any attempt to to be seen to be practicing was punished. And Bhante asked him how he survived, how he practiced. He said, I just decided to do everything that I was told to do well. Whether it was laboring, working in the laundry, I was going to do everything well. I was going to do it perfectly. I was going to do it properly, thoroughly, with full mindfulness. So fully mindful work. And he became very trusted and respected, even in that horrific and brutal world. So whether we're, and sometimes we can feel during this time, it's really hard to practice. It might be really difficult to have quiet time to meditate. It might be really difficult because of work and family to feel that we have the space in our minds to meditate and practice. But you can still practice. You can always practice, whatever your circumstances, whether you're at home alone, whether you're with family, at work. Do everything well, thoroughly, helpfully, but without any unhelpful perfectionism. Don't put yourself under pressure. Just do it with natural, mindful, doing the best you can. It's do it good enough. Be robust about that with yourself. It's good enough, but do it well. Bring mindfulness and awareness to your task, your purpose, your materials, and be generous. Be expansive, especially be fully aware of others. Aim in whatever you do to enrich around the world around you, to enrich the people around you. Think even that this is what's called in Sanskrit the Buddha Kshetra, the Buddha field, the Buddha land, that in whatever you're doing, whatever your work, your family situation, feel that you're serving the Buddhas, feel that you're creating the Buddha field. In the words of the great Zen master Harkwin, which conclude his song of meditation, singing and dancing, all is the voice of truth. Wide is the heaven of boundless samadhi, radiant the full moon of the fourfold wisdom. What remains to be sought? Nirvana is clear before us. This very place, the lotus paradise, this very body, the Buddha. Thank you.